Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
I would like to ask you some questions today about light and light bodies. You often talk about light bodies, and I would be really curious to discover what light bodies are, how they're distinguished from other kinds of bodies that you work with, and what this concept of light is that underlies so much of what you're doing. So, where would you like to start with all of that?
Oh my God, it's such a big subject. But we will start with some really basic principles. Okay. So, first of all, the light body has, we think about as soon as we think about connecting to energy, we always think about physical vibrations, frequencies, tones, and harmonics. But the one that really cuts through everything and connects to all the stuff that we really need because it is so vast, because light moves so quick. So there's you've got to reassociate how we think of light, because there's an actual light, vibration, frequency, tones, and harmonics, and it moves so incredibly quickly, more so quickly than just sound. It allows us to cut through a lot of barriers that previously we couldn't find, because what it does do, light uses very, very vast frequencies. And it's like, um, if you think of neutral energy, it's like very, very vast nuances of areas. So what it does do, it takes a lot of the force. Um, Light won't react to force, and it won't react to manipulation, because it uses this very, very vast frequency, tones, and harmonics. So that if it's picking up, it'll just know we're not interested, basically.
Can I check something with
Yeah,
you? I might have got it
yeah,
wrong, but what the picture I'm getting is that if you're dealing with more physical vibration, if there's
yeah.
something forceful, it will push that physical vibration around. It'll move
Yeah,
it into a different shape and force it. And when you're talking about this light, which has a kind of vibration of its own, but it's a
yeah,
different. It's like if there's physical manipulation, probably it would just go straight through it and not make any difference to it. It doesn't
yeah.
have any power over it. Is that what you're saying?
It just doesn't connect.
Yeah. Okay, thank
And
you.
if it's there, it has, yeah, it's like you're learning all this completely different language as well, because one, once you start to use it, you don't react and respond, or over respond. Um, but to do it, we have to do a few things. One, we have to use absolutely our soul and our heart together to create this whole package, which is our whole spirit body. Yeah. We have to use different types of conscious and make sure that we use our whole collective conscious throughout our whole body, because there's also another form of our light body, in that it is connective consciousness. And the connective conscious and the light body are all, they're all basically in the same package, if you like, because this allows us to use absolutely trillions and trillions of different types of nuances of any one conversation. But in that, within that conversation, we make sure it is always neutral. It is never subjective to powers that um, are only very for a physical outcome. They have to start only with a spirit and a conscious outcome to start with, which means that they must be facilitated through our spirit firstly, so that they know that they come from a true source.
So, what's the
Um,
difference between spirit and light?
um, it's sort of one and the same, but the this light is more using your own personal light with universal light, and then they just they'll carry on a conversation. Because if it's physical energy, you can't. If it's just plain physical energy, you cannot carry on a light conversation. It will reject it all the time.
And what
So
is that? What's the experience of that at the kind of everyday level of me as a human
yeah,
being?
it's
What
more
does
of a
it feel like when that's being rejected?
um,
How do you
I
know?
don't think a lot of people are actually fully aware sometimes that it's even being rejected because they're just more in that physical energy and in that physical moment. So it's like you're only looking for physical outcomes.
And so, but at a subtle level, it's like not being met or not being heard. Like you're maybe you're
Yeah,
looking for something, you're talking about
yeah,
something, but
yeah.
it doesn't get through.
But it's not. There's one thing that, and it really annoys me. There's a lot of people that think there's this um, euphoric bliss. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
some. I mean, it was really big in the. I think it might have been the '80s, and it's the. Oh, just don't worry about that. One day you'll understand. It'll all be perfect, you know. And that annoys the hell out of me because there, if you're going into this euphoric bliss, that's where you're picking up lots of energy that's just being manipulated. It's just, I mean, it's generally crap.
Can you say a bit more about that? Because that's quite a challenging thing, I would think, for quite a lot of people to listen
It
to. Because
is.
a lot of people are looking for nirvana, bliss. They take that as a measure of an
Yeah, and
achievement, if you like.
it is, and it's an over. It's when you we have to go in, we'd have to go into a different conversation where it's very easy for people to become basically completely ungrounded. So a lot of people, when they meditate, they completely become ungrounded, and when they do, you channel this energy between here and heaven, and there's a lot of energies in there that are all quite manipulative, and they're just floating around there. It's like a conglomerate of all these tiny little bits of spirit, and it's like
How
it
can they
just
make you feel so good? Like bliss is a good thing to feel. How come that
well,
this
yeah, but it
stuff
doesn't
makes
do
you feel
anything.
good?
It's crap. It's like it's like they're keeping you from being grounded
So it
all
makes
the
you
time
feel good, but it disables you. It's
completely, and
kind of
it's
what you're
like
saying.
you're in this false euphoria
It's
because
very, very interesting
and
because
then
there's been a
people
lot
end
of
up losing, and then people honestly they end up losing their houses. Their
yeah.
oh, everything's just going to come to us. Don't worry about it. It'll all happen. But you're not connected any energy, any consciousness, and it's completely disconnected from universal energy. So it's like you're in this false state of belief.
Thank you. It's really important. I know we're really talking about light, and we'll come
Mm.
back to that, but it's been such a big thing for people looking for that experience, and there are so many people and so many stories, like you say, where some people have an ease with feeling that and
Mm.
experiencing it, but it doesn't produce a good life
It
as
doesn't.
such.
It produces a complete and false and fake life, and it's like um,
It's very hard to say that to somebody, I think, but
I know,
I
and it
feel it's
is,
important
and it's
to
really
face
hard
it.
because you know I've done a lot of workshops up in Sedona, and I've seen the people almost walking down the street, almost waiting for this euphoric moment that's going to happen when we're at Sedona, we're going to have this magical experience. It's like they're waiting for Harry Potter to come and visit, almost, you know.
Maybe he will. Okay,
Well,
shall we? Shall we
and
come back to light?
we'll get back to the light body. So
Yeah.
when we get back to the light body, you've got to think of your consciousness as a whole conglomerate. So on many multiple levels, especially just say on an everyday conscious level, yeah. Um, there's a lot of components in it that we only use segments of it very so certain set we'll use a certain amount of conscious in different packages to say, well, we'll use that lot to because that worked last time, we'll use this lot next time, or but there's only a small amount or formula, if you like, of certain types of consciousness that we use to actually facilitate being able to make a whole cycle of some information, and then a lot of the time we're not. But what it
So
means
you
is,
mean we're operating on a very small part of
yeah,
consciousness in order to run our life, basically?
it's tiny. It's tiny. It is so tiny. And then once we use our light body, it allows us to use one component that everyone seems to be missing, and that's connective consciousness, because it connects all these different types of conscious together, which means that it's like having a greater logic, so that you can see things. Like I see so many people when I first meet them, and it's like the answer's right in front of their face, and they wouldn't know if you hit them over the head with it.
Yeah,
So
I
what
see that a
happens
lot
is,
too.
yeah, you know what I mean. We've
Yeah.
all done workshops with people, and people are even missing the main component of what is them. So it allows you to see, because otherwise you're walking around. It's like you got blinkers on and you can only see this.
Yeah.
But it's like you have no peripheral vision, basically. And you've got to be able to see this vastness and use this vastness all the same time. Once we do that, it allows us to then use a lot of our subconscious, which is where main parts of our intuition and instinct come in, and then the two merge. So you're using all this different types of collective conscious, which are all different types at all different levels of consciousness, all simultaneously at the same time.
Because it's all connected.
Yeah, and then it means that you've got all these different conversations. But the great thing is, as you know, when we start all this work, people's heads are incredibly busy. So if you imagine this really, really vast collective of conscious, and every one of them's got all these little conversations going on, but none of them are all joined together. They're all, so people's heads are going, rrr, rrr, rrr. You've got all these different conversations going on because they're not all talking on the same subject. So once you use connective conscious, you bring all these different all the conversations become one subject. And it's really strange for a lot of people, because everybody thinks that a busy head is accomplishing a lot. No, it's a lot of confusion. So once and you know what we're talking about because you've experienced it. But as soon as you start to be able to talk just like multiple conversations on one subject, we become quiet, because you don't have all this peripheral gabble coming in and saying, well, what about this? What about this? But you just are able to just concentrate on what is needed. Yeah.
So when you talk about multiple conversations, you're talking about energetic conversations, like receiving multiple levels of information at an energetic level. And then your mind is quiet and clear, so it can deal with it can select and discern and use what's necessary.
And it's really weird, because often you can go into different areas and you can see the problems sitting out, and everyone's standing around and scratching their heads, and you'll say, well, what about this? You don't mean to, excuse me, but you don't mean to be a smartass or anything, but you can just see it. It's like you're talking to Blind Freddy, basically, because
all the conversations are in their head, not in their energy.
You can say, do you mind if I suggest something? What about if we did that? Would that help? You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes people get the shits with you because it's sometimes blatantly obvious, and then they get the shits, and then they storm around, and then later on they say, oh, that was a really good idea. And I say, well, look, I wasn't trying to be a smartass, I just thought it might help. Yeah. You know?
So something I want to clarify, because sometimes you say collective consciousness, sometimes mostly you're saying connective consciousness, but every now and then you say collective consciousness.
Yep.
Is there a connection between those two, and is there a distinction between those two?
Absolutely. Because the collective conscious is not just your head. And that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people think, because your whole body is a conscious matter.
Mm.
Yeah.
So most of us, when we talk about collective consciousness, we see it as the consciousness of the collective. So the consciousness of humanity as a collective, that entire body rather than the consciousness that is my individual consciousness. So is
And
that
that's
different from how you're seeing it?
yeah, and that's right, because you need to have this whole collective conscious of self to be able to talk to the whole collective
Collective consciousness.
conscious of what is in the universe, you know?
So
And
the
then,
collective consciousness is always connective consciousness as well.
yeah,
But collective
that's right.
consciousness is also full of a lot of garbage,
It
isn't it?
is. It is. And that's what the connective conscious helps us alleviate. So it
Okay.
goes through and it helps us discern, because that's the thing, you find what you need and you find what you don't need, and all these things that you don't need, and you don't have to carry on a conversation with it. It's like when you're trying to discern between loads and loads and loads of different people what is needed, then all of a sudden you can change absolutely and completely everything. And this just allows you to have, once you do that, then you have a completely and absolutely totally different conversation, because there's not these irrelevant conversations going on. But what about me? It's like having thousands of needy children all on the side here. What about me? What about me? What about me? What about me? Or relatives, how some relatives are just, it's all about them. It's they don't consider everybody else and everybody else's things, what's going on. And that's
I do notice many people who have a great difficulty in picking out what's the relevant thing to talk about here. It's like lots of other things are crowding into their conversation, which are often what about me conversations, rather than what is it that we're talking about? What are we trying to get done here? What's right and relevant for me to contribute? And where would it really be better to shut up? And I see they don't have that clarity, which is what you're talking about. That's the product of what you're talking about when you're operating
exactly.
from this connective consciousness. Then you can easily see, because your mind is not busy.
No, it's not. And you are able to discern then what needs, because we all have all these different receptors and senses. And what everybody thinks is that, first of all our senses are all just in here and they're all working and everything's happening. But when you can see that people's senses are all sitting out here and they're picking up all this garbage, and then your senses have receptors, which I've sort of talked about a little bit, which I see as like a string of grapes, and they're all picking up, and it's like the skin has been pulled back, which means that they're picking up more information about everybody else than yourself. And often receptors are facing more outwards than inwards. So we have all these different little parts to us, and it's finding all these parts that allow us to use ourselves and basically we are becoming responsible for all the different types of energy that we have, and all the little bits and pieces that we have, because we're just like a big mechanic. We have different mechanics. So I often like us to a computer, because we have so many parts that are like software, and we have so many parts that are like hardware, and we've got to use them all because we're a complex body. But the more we use, the less effort we have to put in. It's like it's like you buy a really old cheap computer, and to do the same amount of work, which you pick up a good Mac and bang, you've done it in 3 seconds. It's like you get rid of that frustration,
Yeah.
because
I
you're
often see
able to
that you're like
process.
you're like somebody who knows what's happening inside the computer. I kind of
Yeah,
always see it like
basically.
that. And I'm somebody who knows how to use a computer, but I have no clue what's going on inside. But I'm
Well,
quite good at using it.
yeah. Well, we all have it. It's just we all have little specialities,
We ha-
and
e- exactly. So I want
so,
to come back to explore the connection
mhm.
between connective consciousness and the light body.
Okay. So we have this light body, and the light body facilitates the connective consciousness. So we have to have certain areas of light which go through all our different types. So we have, if you imagine all the different types of conscious we have, all the different types of energy we have, it connects it up. So basically, we're only talking light language only. So we get rid of all the physical language, which is a bit strange, I know, but because the majority of physical
Physical
language,
language being the stuff that's in your head.
yeah, yeah, completely,
Yep.
because that is the majority of a lot of that's garbage. It's more about everybody else than ourselves, yeah.
And it's also
Um,
old stuff. It's always the old stuff
uh,
rather than the new.
it is. It's like, especially when you go back through, um, a lot of it can be connected to old relatives and all sorts of junk, you know. So, but when we find that light language, it is just, it is just, it's how we facilitate what is just about us, and it does connect so many areas.
So we've got a
But it is a
physical
bit of
language.
work to get to it.
Is there another there's another language which is the is there another language, physical language and light language, but there's another one in between there, isn't there?
Well, there's also there is a conscious language as well, um,
That
which
sounds like a fairly good one though, a useful one.
it is, but your light body, you need to be using your light body to use it. But
Okay.
also, you've got to think that we all have different types of channels, and it's like, you listen to the news on lots of different channels.
Hmm.
So um, you learn to use um, you learn to use your telepathy, which is a totally different skill set. But your light your light body also engages loads and loads of what is your aura, so that you channel and you bring your whole aura back in. Then it's a completely different body, because if your aura is way out here, it's dragging in information because it's like a channel.
Yeah.
So once we change that, I mean, we have to go through a lot of layers, as you know. We've got to go through a lot of things, and we don't just say, "Oh, yes, today we're just going to start with that." You don't.
Yeah.
There's a whole foundation of us that we need to connect to, which stabilizes everything. After we've done that, then we can find all the really exciting. Well, even that's exciting. I mean, you can tell people are just smiling their heads off when we go to it. But once you find those first few stabilizing parts, then life changes quite a lot. Then you can find all this exciting stuff that just really, it blows a lot of myths out of the water, really, because you're finding a lot of things that are, um, sometimes they seem a little bit unfathomable, and they feel overcomplicated. But it's like, once we use a complex body, all of a sudden you're able to use these different components, but really easily. So that
It
once we,
sounds to me like one of the things you're also describing is the underlying reason why, for example, I know that I tend to be able to look at things and see there's a lot of stuff that people say and think that just isn't true.
yeah,
And there's a lot of stuff out in the public arena as well, which just, it really isn't true. And it becomes much easier to see through things. You might not see exactly what is true without actually going to investigate a bit, but you can tell immediately. And I'm thinking also, so that kind of ability, and then abilities like telepathy, which is really being able to read directly what somebody else is
yeah, it's saying,
communicating and thinking. But so these are all aspects of using your light body rather than trying to use that physical body and that
yeah,
physical vibration.
it just isn't possible,
Yeah.
because you're when when you use your light body, it can communicate so much information. It's like sometimes you're sharing, like encyclopedias of information, because you can't tell somebody enough. You can't physically. It's like being able to show somebody years and years of work, and sometimes, um, you can do that in seconds or
Yeah,
even
this is
minutes.
really important because I think this is something that is not talked about much. A lot of communication that goes on in the world is, in a way, very impoverished. It contains very little information, and then people need to talk a lot to get anywhere. And once you start with what you're talking about, you can talk to somebody in very simple language. I notice this especially because I think this is something that I do a lot. I talk a language that is so simple that anyone could understand it. And everybody receives so much information, but they receive the information that's right for them. So
That's
there's
right.
so much more being conveyed through that language of meaning and of subtlety than is obvious if you would take the words. And it's a very tangible experience. But what's powerful is that it's really useful as well, because if you can have a conversation with somebody and it's like they grok so much more than what's in the words. Imagine that in business, for example, or in any difficult family situation, or wherever you might apply it. It it allows it allows solutions and resolutions and all the other things that we look for in challenging situations to come out much, much more quickly.
I'd like to give a couple of different examples of that because
Yeah.
um, for everybody who's generally done our courses, um, it's really interesting. After the people who've done it, all of a sudden their kids won't leave them alone because you're talking so many different types of languages and their bodies pick it up. And like kids often just follow you around and like it's great to see. I mean, I hear it from basically just about everybody who's done our courses. You know, they said, and I'll say, look, your kids will end up not, you won't leave you alone for a while because it's like all of a sudden you're talking this different language and their spirit's picking it up, their energy's picking it up, their consciousness is picking up. And it's like all of a sudden you've got something completely different to say. And I mean, I know for when people have come to visit and sometimes I've been sitting downstairs and then next thing you know, the kids, I mean, they're not my kids, they're the kids who've come to visit. All the kids are sitting upstairs having a good time, but they've talked to me and my wife for ages. And then eventually they'll say, oh yeah, I better go and see him. And it's because you're talking this completely different language and they feel at ease, but it's like they want to know how you're working efficiently. It's like their subconscious picks up all these telepathic messages and it's like saying, wow, I want to know how you're really working. I want to know how you're doing this. Because, and I know because sometimes when I've done a lot of work, you know, sometimes I can't get rid of some people because they know you're working on a different level now or whatever. And they're trying to pick up all this information straight away because everybody scans, you know, and that's what your light body does. It scans other people. It picks up. It's like little trillions and trillions of lasers going out, only you can't see them. And they're just picking up all this information. It's not vibration, frequency, tones, and harmonics. It's light energy bouncing between us. And when you can see it, after a while, you can see all this energy, and it's all counter transference, you know.
So it's a very direct form of transmission between
It
people that
is.
doesn't require words.
Yeah, it doesn't require words, but it's passive. It's not passive aggressive. It's completely and utterly passive. And that's the great thing. It's like, that's why when we teach people to use, and when you learn to ground, you aren't just grounding physically. I mean, I know we all go around, we feel everything, and it's all a bit physical to start with. But eventually, your light body turns on and you're sending out so many different messages. It's like saying, I have an opportunity I'd like to share with you. It's instead of you're saying physically, you're saying, if you don't buy this, you're an idiot. But that's what, because it's really interesting, because when you teach people how to use this energy, and like as I said, I've got heaps of people who go into business meetings and they will simply not go into a meeting without grounding because they're not trying to sell anybody something. They're trying to say, look, I've got a really great product. It may be for you, it may not be for you. It's your choice. All I want to do is present it. If it's good for you, then go with it. If it's not, but what it does is it breaks down all these barriers. And so basically, you're talking a completely different language rather than, hey, quick, you got to buy this. You got to buy this. If you don't buy this, you're going to miss out. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I know that
you're
the
not
difference is
doing the
huge.
great big spiel, and then like people go home, like, oh god, why did I buy all this crap? It's just shit. It's useless. It's
Yeah,
not going to
it's
help me in the long run.
it's a totally
You know,
different experience. I
it
know
is.
that for myself. It's so easy to have those conversations with people because there's no
Mm.
pressure, there's no
No,
neediness, there's
no,
no requirement for them to respond in any particular way, and there's no hooking of their energy. Like what I see is people try to hook other people
they
energetically
do.
to
They
do
do.
something. I don't feel any of that at all when I'm in
And
those
I even
conversations.
see it in the so-called wellness arena. You know, there's a lot of people who
Especially,
know, oh mate, it's worse. It's honestly, it is worse than corporate. The wellness, it is worse than corporate. Like it's almost like sometimes the wellness industry is like one of the most corrupt businesses I've ever seen in my damn life, and it drives me nuts
that's why
because
they talk
people are
about
aware.
snake oil.
Sorry, yeah,
That's why they
and
talk
they
about
they're
snake oil.
shifting people's energy, and like I don't know, even donkeys years ago, like when my sister and I went and saw some really well versed people, and I said, wow, look at that. They're all using over positive energy and look at bouncing around the room. And I said, they're just connecting to everybody, and everybody's energy goes from one side to the other. And you know that all of a sudden it's like they're having an energy fix. But this
You
energy
lose
fix
your own power.
is they're using your own power on yourself, saying, and it's not ethical. I mean,
Yeah,
not
I think
everybody
lots of
knows
people do
that. I
it.
mean, not everybody knows that they're doing, but there's a lot I know are bloody. It's just so unethical, and it drives me nuts. That's why I like to show people and say, look, you don't have to go into all this because there can be like there's for everything. There's good energy. There's manipulative energy, and just because something has may seem to have a lot of power, yeah, but they're using your power against you, or they're using your power unconsciously or subjectively, and it's not ethical. And that's something why we've always got on because we're aligned to not allow all that over um, pressurized selling, and it just drives us nuts.
Yeah, yeah. And it's sad because it's very effective. People get results, they get short-term
Yeah,
results, but it doesn't give you long-term satisfaction
no,
and happiness and fulfillment and the things that we actually care about as human beings. And I think it's really important to realize that when we use energy unethically, you might in the short term be able to get some results. There's a lot of it done, often also amongst more powerful people. They know sometimes how to use energy unethically, but I feel that life is worth a lot more than that,
it
and that
is.
to experience fulfillment and to feel good within your soul and your heart about what you're doing and the way you're doing it, that gives me a much richer life experience than the cheap pleasure of getting something now, but not creating relationships, not creating that just the kind of fullness, a full experience of life. Just like I'm just going to go for the money and I'm not going to go for anything else. I don't see any point in that.
Yeah, it's something I learned very early in life. I took a lot of jobs, unfortunately, which were paying well, but in the end, I just told. In the end, I often told the whoever the owner was, I said, "No, sorry, we can't work together." They used to,
Okay, so we have shown the value, I think, of being able to use your light body and
yeah,
not only your physical body, and of course in this context of talking with highly sensitive people, it's going to make a lot more sense probably to you. We're speaking your language if you're highly sensitive. If it
yeah,
sounds all
exactly.
a bit confusing to you, just relax with it and let it in. It's maybe a little bit new, but it doesn't mean that it's not something you can come to understand and experience, like feel for yourself over time.
And it
So
is a
I,
sensory thing. Sorry,
yeah.
can
No,
I?
I was
Can I?
just going to say, I think that's a. Is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, especially for highly sensitive people, remember we're going from when we move from having like over emotions or over feeling things or things, when you feel like you're being shut down and all that sort of thing. Well, your light body helps basically facilitate what is needed and what isn't needed, which means that we get more of a mean or an average of what is needed and what isn't needed. So we don't have these big highs and big lows, but we do have more of a real um, idea of what's really going on in the world. We have and that's it. That's the whole thing. It's got to be what's real about what's going on, and then you can see through certain things that, oh, no, that's not really for me, or yes, oh, hang on, that's a great opportunity. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. I've learnt a lot as well today. As I say, I use these things, but I don't always know the mechanics of it. So it's really interesting to get your perspective. It's so different from mine. And I think that's why we're very complementary in that way. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Sarah.